I read the release. You referred to these numbers here in our region as stunning and a tsunami. Tell me why.
Over the last number of years, we've seen a continued rise in anti-Semitic incidents. We've been tracking this since 1979. And there's really no way to capture just how shocking it is that even though we've had year after year after year of all-time highs of these calculated, very seriously scrubbed and analyzed anti-Semitic incidents, this is not just complaints. These are verified incidents that have come in. After all of those years, we now have this just unprecedented, shocking number that comes in for the number of incidents of 2023 over 2022. It indicates a real dark moment in our community.
Now, obviously, October 7th played a major role here, and I want to talk with you about that in a moment. But let's talk about prior to October 7th. As you note, these numbers have been on the rise. How do you account for it?
There's no single explanation for why these numbers have been rising the way they have, but there are no question some trend lines that trace back to the opening of a door, Pandora's box, to extremist voices and political figures that welcome all forms of extremism in the pursuit of their own power, provide a really dangerous model that has been built upon. We see social media. Social media creates an incentive structure for people to engage in ever more horrific kind of speech, and speech which demonizes and dehumanizes inevitably leads to action. So I think those two are for sure trend lines we've seen. There is also a very real problem that Zionists are perceived as somehow inherently unworthy, inherently people that should be viewed with suspicion. And Zionists is clearly just a replacement for the word Jews. And that phenomenon, which precedes October 7th, we've seen on college campuses where people who think it is acceptable to say that Zionists don't belong here, who think it is acceptable to decry any expression of Jewish identity if it is associated with and integrated with any notion of a relationship to the land of Israel and to the state of Israel. That is not to say one cannot protest or take issue with any specific policy that might be undertaken by the state of Israel. In fact, if you've ever been to Israel, you'll see a lot of protests. That's pretty normal. What's not normal is to have people attacked because of their identity.
Are we looking at a situation where there are just more haters than there have been? Or are they simply, you sort of hinted at this, feeling more comfortable or more free to express their hate in these vile ways?
I think the answer, unfortunately, is there have been haters all along. It has become fashionable in certain communities to engage in acts of hate. And that fashionable problem that we face is in evidence on college campuses where, with all the problems we're facing in the world, with Russia engaging in what it's engaging in, with Iran doing what it's doing to its own people and to its neighbors, with China continuing to have concentration camps for Muslim Uyghurs. None of that registers on campus, but this issue does. So there is an issue of a permission structure to hate, which has grown and attracted followers who believe they're doing good in the world. They believe somehow that isolating, demonizing, and even attacking Jews is somehow a way to pursue social justice. That's just a deep, deep problem we need to be honest about and confront.
And while when we think of neo-Nazis, we tend to think of right-wing white supremacist groups. And clearly they've been as active or more active than they've ever been. This phenomenon, this surge of anti-Jewish hate transcends right and left, does it not?
It does, and in really insidious ways. Sometimes we think about left and right as if it's a a spectrum that reaches from one arm to the other, and in the expanse of your stretch. The truth is that extremist groups meet in the back. It's sort of like a horseshoe where the two ends meet and reconverge. And there are shared tropes about Jews. In fact, recently on the right, it was the trope you may have heard of called the ZOG, a Zionist occupied government. It was a right-wing trope to claim that America wasn't free. It was subject to the overarching power of the Jews to manipulate America for Jewish interests. Well, essentially the same language is now picked up on the extreme left. And so this idea that American Jews are citizens, we have views about a very complicated conflict, and advocating for the betterment, we think, of the United States and for Jews around the world is a normal thing that communities do, suddenly is turned into this demonic trope about Jewish control. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from the right or from the left. They're wrong in both cases, and they're dangerous in both cases.
I want to talk with you about remedies or at least responses to protect the Jewish community in a moment, but so much has been written and said about the college president's testimony last fall. Well, in hindsight, in light of in the context of what this report finds, how revealing were those comments about, well, it depends on the context? What did we learn from that about a way in which ostensibly polite society accommodates and fosters anti-Semitism?
What the testimony of the presidents on Capitol Hill in December revealed was that these administrators are perceiving their jobs in the most narrow way. They think that Jews are fine. That's got to be the underlying assumption. And their job is simply to make sure that students get served by university services. And it is not their job to police speech. What they fail to understand is that both morally and under the law, they have an obligation to create a space in which everybody is welcome. The Civil Rights Act requires the university to act in ways that will welcome all identities. And just as it would be horrific and unacceptable to disallow Chinese students to come to campus without hiding their place of national origin because of disagreement with the policies of the nation of China, just as it would be unacceptable to force any ethnic group to go underground in order to be welcomed on campus, it is also unacceptable to do that to Jews. And unfortunately, what we've seen was revealed by that testimony, that they just didn't get, that Jewish students are feeling besieged. And by the way, it's not just on campus. This report shows the relationship between this rise on campus and the rise in the general marketplace. We have had attacks at homes, synagogues, on the street, and it is critically important that we pay attention. This is a wake-up call for all of us.
What needs to be done?
Everybody needs to hear themselves being called to the front lines. We all have to stand up. So how do you stand up? Well, number one is you demand of your political leaders that they not engage in acts of demonization or dehumanization of anybody. And when you see that happening, whether it's on your team or the other team, it's your job to call it out, not to vote for them and to tell them the reason why. It's because you trafficked in hate. It's also critically important for every home to be teaching our children that there is a place in our community for a diverse and broad-ranging nature of all people. And people, by the way, who are inherently different. We need to stop assuming that all Jews or all Muslims or all of any community can be kind of reduced to simplistic tropes. Communities are complex and have diversity. The Jewish community is racially and ethnically complex and diverse. We have multiple views about a range of issues, and it is unacceptable to place the Jewish community in a position where synagogues are besieged by swatting calls, where there are bomb threats called into synagogues, where there is defacing of synagogues and defacing of communities, religious expressions, because somehow that's perceived to be simple political speech. Temple Israel in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, was just attacked this past week, where more than 100-year-old sconces were broken by an intruder with anti-Semitic intent. That act against Temple Israel does nothing to help anyone in the world. It simply terrorizes an entire community. And it's up to all of us in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in Boston, in Newton, in Brookline, across the region and across the country to insist that our communities will have no place for hate.